So this video is for the newer people to Maya, my first years, or my second year game, my second year animation students. I'm just going to make a simple asset and I'm going to talk you through it. So this isn't going to be something that's super complex, so it's going to take a long time. It might take about an hour because I'm going to take things a little bit slower than how I would normally work. And it's not going to be using many tools, if anything, we've not used before. I might use a couple of tools at the end just to make it look a little bit nicer visually. But generally, everything we're going to be using is what we've used before. Now, excuse me as well, I'm kind of losing my voice at the minute, so I might sound a little bit croaky. So first of all, I've got Maya open. I'm going to make my project. So this is just going to be a candlestick. Candlestick. And I'll dump this somewhere relevant. So let's put it there. Cool. Now I'm going to find my reference. I need to find my reference because I'm not going to. If you've not designed a lot, if you've not modeled a lot in the past or anything like this, it's hard to kind of just bring those ideas out of your head straight onto the world of 3D. You've kind of got to think about what you want to do first, or have a visual reference about what you want to do first. The creative mind is a muscle, and you've really got to exercise it and exercise it. And also, you've got to, as the artist Jake Parker says, you've got to keep putting into your intellectual bank account. So you've got to keep putting more reference, more studies. You've got to keep just putting more and more into your bank account. At the minute, just from being in the position you are at the minute, you've not got a whole lot of reference to call off just outside, out of your head. So it's best to go in there, grab a reference, then start. If you find a really good reference, start making like a folder somewhere on your computer or even on your Google Drive, where you can just always put all the references you like. I've got a few knocking about on the Google Drive, which are really, really useful when I need them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my reference, and I found my reference. So it's a very nice old-fashioned metal or brass candlestick. It's got some nice shapes in there, but all in all, it's pretty simple. And we're going to be making a pretty low poly version of this, so we're not going to try and get everything looking absolutely perfectly smooth. We can get that just by the fact that the human brain will interpolate that information and through texturing. Excuse the dog. So I'm going to save this, but what I'm going to do, because I want to use this inside my Maya scene, I'm going to use something called an image plane that I can use to kind of like keep the image permanently in my scene, so I can just work with it. I can keep referencing it. And what I'm going to do is save it as a JPEG, but I'm going to put it inside my folder that I've just made. So I've got my candlestick, and I'm going to put it inside images. So then I'm going to put this candlestick ref. There we go. So now that is inside my project stack, and I can call on that image whenever I want. So back into Maya, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that image plane in as a reference. But what I'm not going to do, which you might have seen some people do, and we might do later on in the year for more complex stuff, is I'm not going to assign it to a camera and then basically trace over the top of it. I can do that if I want to, but what I really want you guys to do, and what I try to strive for, is trying just to use it as a reference and use your own judgment, use your own logic, use your own kind of like and design methodology to kind of like just use it as a reference, but not use it as a trace. So I'm going back to my perspective camera, and I'm going to bring it into the right side of the screen here, just where this bunch of information is. So the way I can do that is really simple. I can go to image, sorry, not image. Inside my viewport, I can go up to this top little menu set here, and then go to View, Image Plane, Import Image, and I can just go up to, well, I could stick it also in source images. I just have a habit of putting it in images. Candlestick ref, and boom, that's that. So obviously it's been brought in, and it gets brought in on the actual front of the camera. But obviously it's a bit too big, so I can start scaling this down. Oh, it's a bit too, there you go. So using this size X, I can just scale it down a little bit. There we go. And in my offset X, I can do the same thing. So I can just move that off to the side. There we go. So that's 0.6. Now click to my screen. So now my candlestick is permanently in the side of my screen, which is very cool. Now, I've seen some people over the years create actual planes of geometry and then apply a texture to that. I really don't like doing that because, one, MayaGIF is this really useful tool that just brings in the image perfectly to size, and generally it can get sometimes a bit harder to click these. They're made to just be reference images, but with a piece of geometry you have to get the you have to get the dimensions perfect, and then you have to get a different material assigned to it, and then if you turn something see-through, then the reference gets see-through as well, and if you isolate it, it's just a mess. It gets very messy and it's pointless. I think it's something that comes off from 3ds Max or from college tutors, and I just don't get it. So I've got my image there and I'm ready to go. So first of all, I'm actually going to consider the reference. Before I do anything else, I'm going to consider what shape this is. Now generally this is a cylinder. There's different variants of size and stuff, but generally it's a cylinder, and I'm going to kind of decide to start off from somewhere, and I think I'm going to start off by making this top section here. Or in fact I could make a cylinder the entire height, so from the base to the top I could make a cylinder that high. So what I'm going to do is make a cylinder, make sure obviously it's in the middle of the world, and by default Maya gives us this 20-sided cylinder, which I don't want. That's too high for what I want to actually do. Sorry, I just closed my tool settings there. That's too high. It's too high a poly. It's too much information. So what I'm going to do is actually change. If I go down to inputs polycylinder 1, I'm going to change the subdivision axis down to. If I look from the top, I always want to have this cross section going there and there, bisecting horizontally and vertically. So I'm going to maybe change that down to about 12. Yeah, something nice and low poly, because then I can up the poly later on if I want to. I might do 16 actually. Yeah, 16, because I'm not gonna subdivide it, so there's no point. 12 is a bit of a weird. It's at this stage to get the right outcome. 12 might be a little bit too much of an in-between number. So there we go, 16, nice and low poly, and so I'm gonna just drag this up and just eyeballing the height. So say about that. Go. Yeah, maybe I'll just use the scaling tool, so I'm pressing R. I'll just use this green square just to thin it out a little bit. Much better. Cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the connect tool, so selecting all the edges and then going to mesh tools connect. I'm going to use that just to start segmenting all these different sections. I'm just going to take that display off as well. There we go. So I'm going to basically mentally break this up into a few sections. So I've got this top section here, which is where the candlestick will go in. I've got this middle section here, which I'm actually going to break up into 3. So I've got this section, then I got this section, then I got this section. So that's 4 sections so far. And I've got the bottom section, that's 5 sections, and they're all fairly equally split apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use connect tool and increase that to, so I've got 5 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. Cool, so I'm ready to start actually making some actual shapes and some information on my model. So I'm going to go from the base upwards. So first thing I'm going to do is have a look at the base and just start thinking what to do. So what I'm going to do actually is break this bottom shape into a very kind of drastic angle. So Move this up a little bit because it's a little bit taller than the rest of the shapes. It's up a little bit. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away all the other edges. So backtracking a little bit. I'm just going to have this bottom edge here, this bottom group here, and this will be my base. So I'm going to kind of like eyeball in this edge, bring it up, and this edge will be where this area ends, where this very dark section is here. And I'm going to think up another edge, which is basically halfway in between this curve here. So I'm going to add another in there. Oop, come on. There you go. I'm not bothered about this base section here because I can actually add that in later on. I'm just worried about this section here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to scale out this guy and then scale out this guy just to get a bit of the curve in there. Okay, so what you're going to notice as well throughout this process of making this candlestick is very rarely, or if at all, actually, am I going to go in there and move individual vertex around, or go in and move a couple around like that. All I'm going to be doing, because this is a symmetrical cylindrical shape, I'm just going to be using the scaling tools to move stuff in and out, or just move the translate tool to move stuff up and down. So this should be a very, very equal, very, very nice smooth model when I'm done. So I've kind of got what I think is the right sort of, I'll just move this bottom section up a little bit to get, because there's a curve, the curve gets more intense as it gets to the bottom. It moves up a little bit. Cool. So now I'm going to add another edge up here and down here, so I can add just a little bit more information. So I'll add one here, and I'll add one down here. And this is just using the exact same tool we've used before, that mesh tool connect. And then I can just use the scaling tool again, just to get a bit more of a curve on there. So you can see already we're getting quite a nice curve that reads quite nicely. Again, maybe I'll just lift up this bottom section a tiny bit. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to move on to next is probably this upper fluted section, because that seems pretty simple, and I'll leave this middle section to last. So the benefit of probably going from bottom to top and not worried about this more detailed section, so leaving the more detailed section to last, is that I can grab, if I think that this is too squat, the distance between this upper section and this lower section, I can grab them and move them very easily. But if I have this section in the middle here done, it might be misshapen because I'm having to kind of squash all that detail in to the middle section. So doing these more simple shapes first will allow you to then control if you need to change anything, or if I'll kind of like catch you before you make any mistakes later on. So I'm going to do the same thing as I've done before, using the edge tool, just selecting all the vertical edges, go through and add that edge. So again, I'm going to eyeball this to see the height of this fluted area, which is about there, I'd say. Yeah, so you can already see that the distance is needing to be changed later on. And in fact, this is still a little bit too wide, so I'm going to just thin this out a little bit more, like that. Okay. So again, using that insert, connect, I'm going to up this to about 3 divisions like that. Maybe even just one for now. And I'm going to move it up a little bit so I can start getting this fluted section at the top, like that. Right, this bottom section, now that I'm looking at everything, this bottom section needs to be really kind of scaled out a lot more. And this is the great thing about working in a low poly level first, and not having to go in, not trying to go in there with all the crazy details at first, is that you can catch yourself before you start making these mistakes. So now I have to do a little bit of change I'm going to just move everything up again. Okay, cool. So I've returning back to here. I've created this edge and then just moved it up a little bit, because again, what I'm looking for is the point where this straight edge becomes a curved edge, and I'm just putting an edge inside there, which will be like the beginning point of the curve, and then just using the top of the cylinder as the very end of the curve. So what I've got in the middle is an area which I can add maybe 2 segments to then act as my curve like that. So already we're getting a very nice shape going on. So while I'm here, what I'm going to do is just create, because I've already kind of got most of the shapes in there for the base and the I don't know what we call it, the stopper area. I'm going to create the actual thickness, because this isn't coming up to a very sharp point like this is here. This is quite a thick little area top here, and obviously we've got a base at the bottom which we still need to put in. So I'm going to actually put the base and this little thickness up here in before I go in and do the actual kind of like the detailing of this middle section, because that might be not difficult, but it might take me a little bit of time just to think about what's going on. What's very strange is actually talking through a process that you usually do without talking through it, just to yourself. So bear with me. So what I'm going to do is use the paint selection tool here to quickly just select all these top faces, because obviously I can do the quick selection tool, quick selection trick, clicking once and then shift double clicking next to it to select them going round. But on the top here we can't do that with triangles, it doesn't work. So what I can do is with the with the paint selection tool here, so I can, if it's too big as well like that, I'm just going to end up selecting things I don't want to select. But if I hold B and left click drag left and right, I can make it bigger and smaller. So I can just go and select all these. They're all now selected. I'm going to extrude. Now this is a big one. Just click once for extrude. You don't have to double click extrude. This is where a lot of people are kind of making mistakes. Click once for extrude, and then I can just drag that up to give myself a bit of thickness. There we go. And while I'm here, I'm going to guess that this object has got some form of area for the actual stick to stick into. So I'm going to actually create that. I'm going to extrude and then bring that in a little bit and then extrude again. And then this is where I'm going to do, some of you might have heard me talk about it so far, I'm going to, what I call make the journey. Because I'm going to, and that's what I've done at the very beginning. Now, I've not gone into these really small details and gone like section by section. The first thing I did was make the entire length of the stick. So I'm going to take this down a depth that I think is sufficient enough, like that. And obviously this is going to be as curved as up here. I'll just lower this. Maybe that's a little bit too thick. There you go. So I'm going to add some divisions on the inside so I can kind of mimic this shape. So select all the interior edges, connect, and then bring that in a little bit. You can do one there. There we go. So now that gives me a much more believable shape for a candlestick to sit in. Cool. So now I'm going to go down and do the base, and I can do that exactly the same way. I can go and use my, make sure I've got no faces selected while I do this. It's my face select tool, my paint selection tool, and then painting those selections around there. And then I'm just going to extrude this down, and while I'm moving down, I'm going to hold X, and X is snap to grid. So it's going to snap to this grid here, which is what I want. And so what I'm looking at is I've got a little bit of movement here, a little bit of movement. So I've got this curve here, and then I've got a straight drop down here. So what I'm going to do is add another division going round, like that, and then this ring of faces at the bottom, I'm going to scale them out, but I'm not going to scale just using the center tool like that, because then that's going to start scaling up and it's going to start scaling down, and the base is going to start actually moving through the floor. So I'm going to use, again, this little square, like I said at the beginning in the first assignment. These little squares on your scaling tool basically just eliminate that color's axis. So if I don't want to move inside the x-axis, I'll grab the red square, and that will scale out in the y and the z, but not the x. So I don't want to scale in the y-axis. I don't want to give any height to it. So I'm going to scale that out a little, just a tiny bit, just like that. That's all I want to do. And then to create this kind of inverted section here, I'm going to go around and select those, add 2 divisions using my connect tool, and just scale in and move down, and maybe scale up. There we go. Maybe just bring this top X section in again. There we go. Cool. Now things are looking very blocky in places, like down here it's looking very blocky, up here is looking very blocky. Or faceted, we call these faceted edges. Faceted. F-A-C-A-T-E-E-D. So I'm going to sort them out later on. I'm just not worried about that yet, because this doesn't mean that your model's broken. We can still smooth it off later on. But for now, what I'm going to be doing is thinking what needs to be done next. So, looking at this reference. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. This is where it can get a little bit complex. Because even for me, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, you know, what would be the best way to show you guys how to do this? Because I definitely have a way I'd do this, but it's a little bit advanced than I want to show you just at the minute. Because it uses what I call bad habits, my bad habits, which are good, but they're my bad habits, and they shouldn't really be used if you're not used to them. You should develop your own bad habits. So let's do a save first. So we've not saved all the way through this, so let's do it. Save Candlestick on 1. There we go. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to visually kind of break this whole section up. We've got a section which comes in here. We've got a section which comes in here. We've got a section that comes. Well, we've got this middle, almost bell section here, and then the 2 upper sections there. So I'm going to actually, once again, just thin this out a little bit more. Right. So let's break this up into 3 segments. So yeah, so already it remembers that I had 2 segments. So also, yeah, I want this top section, middle section, and lower section. That's what I want. And I'm actually going to create this kind of crazy looking middle section first. And again, what I'm going to do is, if I bring up Photoshop, I can show you a bit clearer. We'll get the obligatory red colour. Is I've sectioned off this top, bottom section, and then this section and this section. So what I'm going to do is add another 2 divisions in this middle section here, but one that's going to basically control this pinch, and one that's going to control this flare in here. So I'm first going to make a shape which looks like that. And then I can start adding the information in there. And I'm going to, obviously this does have some more smoother information here and down here. I can add that in later on. Again, the main thing is I just want to get the big information in there. And it's these general shapes. So the same thing down here, I'm just going to make a shape which does that. And down here, I'm just going to make a shape which does that, which will need me just making a line in the middle of both of them like that. Because then it's very easy to make the rest of them, because I'll probably end up adding another division across there and across there to make these circular sections up here and up here, and another section up here and down here, down here, to make these, again, rounder sections. I'm trying to break up this model into manageable chunks rather than going and trying doing all these different details at once. And this helps because you've got these areas where dirt and grime has collected over time, because this looks like it's, you know, quite old. And I'm using those visual keys. There's a dark line there, there's a dark line there, there's a dark line there. I'm going to use those as my segment breaks. So let's do this middle section first. So I'm going to add 2 divisions. Again, using that mesh insert, it remembered that we had 2 before. So I'm going to move those down a little bit. And then this first one is coming in. The second one is coming out. Like that. Maybe a little bit more. See, also the great thing about working like this, where you're literally just putting in, using a symmetrical tool like this, and then just putting in edges and just using the scaling tool, is that if you need to change anything, maybe this curve is a little bit too flat, it's just so easy just to grab the curve the edge you want to kind of change and just move it using the scaling tool. So from there, I'm going to add another division above and below this section here to start getting that, and just keeping it as one, and then using that scaling tool just to bring in a little bit, and then underneath change that to 2, gets a bigger curve. That. So we're getting somewhere with this. Maybe this needs to be raised up a little bit, or even this down. Cool. So I'm going to leave that like that for now. I'm going to go in there and add my 1 division around the top to pinch in that top section. 1 division down here to pinch in that one. There we go. And honestly, in a lot of games, that is what the asset will actually look like geometrically. They won't put in a lot of this surface detail because it's just superfluous. They can hide it inside shaders. But because we're concentrating on getting better modeling skills, we're going to actually go and add in some of those details. So if we jump back to Photoshop, we can highlight some of those. So yeah, what I'm going to do is start adding this sort of, there's a sort of circular torus section at the top here. It goes around and creates like a bit of a round fluted shape like that. So I'm going to go in and add that, and that again, that is going to be really simple to do. And I really mean it. When I say it's simple, I really do mean it's simple. So, because what I'm doing is I'm just thinking very, very basically about something. So I'm going to add a division up here, turn it to 3, but then use the toolkit, tool settings for this function to pinch them all together so they're closer together, and then slide them up to the top like that. And then just start just getting a bit of shape in there. Maybe add 1 more division in there just to make sure I can get that nice round edge. Reset my tools on that. There we go. Start getting the nice curvy nature of this section here sorted. The same thing down here. Get them done. I'll move these down a little bit because I'm aware that I'm going to have one of these circular torus shapes. A torus is basically like a donut. That's a torus, little donut shape. So I'm aware there's one there, and there's one at the bottom as well. But like I said, like I was showing you, they're really easy to make. So I'm actually going to add one at the very top of the base section here. So a lot of this is just repeating the same tools over and over again. Just to kind of get those really awesome shapes in. And really iconic shapes. The shapes that really make an asset, they say pop. And there are really minor details like the section for Photoshop at the bottom, where we've got a straight edge there, and then our bell shape. So I'm going to put that in a second as well. And same thing up there. So actually what I'm seeing as well, I'm looking at this, these here isn't necessarily like that. This actually curves into the shape like that. So that's why we need to look at our reference a lot. So I'll need to go in there and to the top here and just make sure it's kind of already there. Just make sure it's doing it a little bit, controlling that curve a little bit more. There you go. So I can see there I've got that torus shape here as well. So what I might do actually is be a bit cheeky with stuff and use the beveling tool just slightly to give myself that edge, and then use the connect tool. Scale that out. Even more, I guess, looking at it, it really does kind of pronounce itself. But that can also come from that nice line just above it, that right angle, which I'm going to actually add in. So again, connect tool, slide it all the way to the bottom, about there, and then bring that in a little bit. Make a point about that line. Go up here, do the same thing. So, not segment. Slide that to the bottom. And just slide it in a little bit. There we go. Now also, we're not getting a whole lot of this visual cues, these really nice shapes, because everything's very smooth or everything's very sharp. We're not able to define sharp angles just yet, or we've not gone in and defined these sharp angles just yet. We can do, and that really does help speak to the object to make it just a lot more interesting to look at. I was going and doing a little bit of tweaking here. Okay, and there's one torus underneath. So, see, one thing that I would do that I wasn't showing you before is my way of doing this, which is I would make lots of different shapes, like physical shapes. Like I'd make torus shapes, I'd make spheres, I'd make I'd make a sphere for this kind of curved section here. I'd make a torus for all these different torus shapes. But that's a lot of process of cutting and sewing and bridging, and then fixing any edges that need fixing. And that's what I taught. That's what I mean about bad habits. That's a bad habit of mine, which just might not work for other people. It might really kind of confuse people to why I work like that, or it might just be too much information to handle at this time. Where all I'm doing at the minute is using the exact same tools we've used over and over and over again so far, just to get a bit of information in there, a bit more information in there. Oops, my what? Okay. And these edges here, where I'm doing sort of like harder these angles here, is I'm trying to get as close to a 90-degree angle as possible. But I'm not worried about getting it perfect, because I'm going to do something in a second that will help me just make that more believable. I'll make that more visually appealing. So also what I'm going to do is some of these angles I'm noticing, like these fluted areas here, they're a little bit stiff, they're a little bit hard. So I'm actually going to bevel those just to relax them a little bit, like that. Much better, like one there. But the angle's just too drastic. I'm coming down at the switches. Maybe that one. No, I'll just do this one for now. So that's the beveling tool that we used on the crate at the beginning, so we should all be pretty familiar with that. I can do a small one now. And again, a lot of this is just practice, 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 practice. And I'm actually going to do it on each one of these little edges here, like that, just so. So that's just a bevel tool, remember. So I'm selecting the edges, and what that does is it turns a single edge into at least 2 edges. And I can also add the size using this little toolkit at the side. You add how big this new edge is going to be, or how many segments are going to be inside it, or if the depth is going to poke out or poke in. So that's depth, poke it out, poke it in. You know, there's a lot of cool, neat tricks we can do. But I'm just trying to use, for this process, I'm just trying to use the really basic toolkit. So you can see there, I've really kind of made that jump out a little bit. I'm going to make more of a point of these right angles, make them a bit bigger, because one thing with games or anything to do with entertainment is you always want to push that imagination, that believability or whatever, that extra few percent. You want to take the real and kind of make it a little bit fantastical. Which is always super fun to do. So actually looking at this, I can see that probably my middle section's a bit too wide. So that's a way of fixing that, which is quite easy. So we've all kind of used it at some point. So what I'm going to do is select everything at the very top of my candlestick, and then I'm going to hold Shift and press period to grow my selection up until I get to this point here. And all I'm going to do is press B, and this is my soft select. And if I hold B and left click, mouse drag left and right, you can make it bigger and smaller. What I'm going to do, this is basically a way of softly moving stuff around. So you see there, if I turn it off and I try and move stuff, it's very stiff like that. But if I press B and move stuff, it kind of has like a bit more of a softer motion to it. The yellow means it's completely influenced by the movement. The darker it gets to black, it means it's less influenced. So down here, when you get kind of like it's half influenced by the movement. What I'm going to do is just make sure I'm just kind of touching the bottom of that. And I'm just going to scale everything, not scale, sorry, but translate everything down a little bit. Make that a little bit smaller. Do it again, like that, much better. Just so I'm making that section a little bit more squatter. And in fact, I could use that again to just push. So that's a fun tool to use, and experiment with it. So don't jump straight into it and start using it. I'll start trying to use it and then I have to struggle. Just experiment on stuff, see how it actually works. We can use the scale it out a little bit more. So it's not absolutely perfect to the reference, but it's still quite a nice looking piece of geometry. That's the one thing I forgot to do then that I was meant to do. This little dark line here, I'm actually going to extrude in a tiny bit. So what I'm going to do is add a cut there, add an insert a connection, and scale that or slide that so it just comes up to this point. And I'm going to extrude this face in. So extrude and then just use the thickness to just push it in a tiny bit and use the offset just to manually do that. Oh, no, that's not working. Here we go. Just to give it a bit of visual, again, just a visual appeal. So we're almost ready to start getting this, either some materials applied to it, or maybe some, am I missing another one of these edges at the bottom? Yeah, but I'll leave that one. So I'm going to save because for now the modeling's done. So now what I'm going to do is go around and make this look a lot more appealing and actually give it the impression that there's more geometry there than there actually is by doing something that we call softening and hardening edges. And so you can see here that we've got very soft edges, or what looks like soft edges, and here we've got very hard edges. So I'm going to select everything, delete all the history, because all the information about extrude and all this information here, I want to get rid of that because I'm done with the modeling now. So delete all by type, or delete by type, history, gone away. Cool. And so if I, with my object selected, if I go up to mesh display and then down to soften edge, everything becomes very soft. Or if I do the reverse, if I go up to mesh display and then harden edge, we see each individual polygon. So what I'm going to do is actually do like an in-between of this. I'm going to soften the entire thing first, and it looks okay, but we're getting things like this where the edges get black or very dark because it can't calculate the fact that this is a right angle, but I'm asking it to do a soft edge. The light's trying to move across the surface like it would do over a softer edge, so at this point it's just not handling that quite well. So what I'm going to do is go around and individually harden some of the edges, and it's super simple but super effective. In edge mode, and this is a great thing about working on an object like this, which is symmetrical, I can just double click this edge at the very bottom, go up to mesh display, harden edge. You can see that now this is a nice hard edge, and I could do that. So I'm looking at my reference here, I'm seeing that there's one here, there's one there, where this sort of like this little bevel occurs. So I can harden that edge. There we go. And then there's one at the bottom of the lip here, so I'm going to go in, harden edge. One here, one here. So remember that G for gamma, is my repeat last tool, and the last tool I used was harden edge. So I'm just going to go through and keep doing that. So I'm just looking at my reference while I'm doing this, trying to find all the places where it would make sense that it would be a real hard transition. There we go. Maybe one inside just because. There we go. So now we're given the impression that we've got these really nice, crisp, high definition edges, when really we've not changed anything about the geometry. It's still the same poly count, but it's just giving the impression of high poly. And what I can do just to kind of make this look visually more appealing while I'm working on it is go up to my little set of options here And we've got this option here, which is our turn on wireframe, which is very useful to do. Very useful to it with that turned on. Also notice that I didn't delete any edges on this. I've not actually deleted any geometry. I've only added geometry. Not willy-nilly. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I've not added geometry without trying to. I've not over added geometry is what I'm trying to say. I've not added too much geometry. But I have noticed that I should really have one more division here, where I can just kind of give a little bit of a curve here. And that shouldn't have added anything to me. Nope, cool. So that was like a really minor thing that was just, when I saw it, I knew it had bugged me. So there you go. This is a object that can absolutely go in any AAA title. This is the thing that I try and get across is inside games, animation, TV. It's all about smoke and mirrors. A lot of the stuff that you're seeing either is super low poly or a plane of geometry or even doesn't exist. It's all trickery of the camera. So you don't need to go in there and start making this so dense that it's like this. You do not need to do this for a lot of things. At least when you're starting off as well. Just get used to making very nice low poly things. Because then one, it's easier, if I need to change anything on this, it's easier to change. In fact, well, here's a good example. I've noticed that maybe my flute section here is a little bit too short, so I can just grab that and move it up a little bit. And if I had to do that with a lot more geometry, see that's already kind of made it a little bit more appealing to me. If I had to do that with like thousands upon thousands of faces, it'd just be a little bit harder to do. Well, it'd be very hard to do. So that's one model made, and I can then start turning on the ambient occlusion, this screen space ambient occlusion. This will kind of darken any of the, it's quite subtle, but it'll darken any of the places which are kind of light is hard, it's finding it a bit hard to get to. And then I can start unwrapping this and texturing it, or even do something very simple like render this. So let's give ourselves a bit of a studio box. So we should be pretty familiar with making these. This is our bounce. Ooh, this is our bounce room for our light. So let's make this a nice shiny. Let's make it an Arnold material. So let's make it a standard shader. And let's color it a brassy color. So let's make it this color. And then let's get the specular shininess to be around about that color. And make it brighter though. That weight up so it's nice and shiny. There we go. Bring the roughness down. Cool. Let's get a light in the scene. Get a nice point light out front. And let's get the Arnold up. Open our render view. Let's get our light options up. Quadratic decay. So obviously we've still got the reference image on our Arnold, so I'm actually going to get rid of that. Should be able to just get rid of it. There we go. So let's change attributes of our light. Let's make the exposure about maybe 10. Yeah. Get the radius working. Yeah, that's a nice looking asset. So the great thing about these assets as well, these very small, fun little assets, is that they are small assets. And if you imagine this inside a game engine, or inside a game environment, this is unfortunately probably going to be looked over, knocked over, but it's flavour. It's used to spice the scene up. It's used to influence the environment a little bit. If this wasn't in the scene, it wouldn't be seen. Or something would be missing from the scene. The player would feel detached from the scene. So assets like these, though simple to make, I mean, if I was doing this at speed, I could probably make this in about 10 minutes using my little quick little cheats. But if you can knock out and just take your time and think about these assets, if you can knock out a good few of these assets a day, or even just one, you got pasta boiling on the stove, make a candlestick. I've got a little mug of coffee on my desk at the minute. Maybe I could make that. I've got like a little wine glass thing. Make that. I've got a bottle. I've got a little mint jar thing. I've got a bowl. I've got a stein. I've got a little speaker. If you could make these things and just get used to using the tools and getting used to not going in and, if something looks wrong, assessing why it looks wrong and taking a bit of time instead of going there, hand fist and start to bash everything around. So I'm going to take a quick break and just come back in the same video and then unwrap this for you. So this is the outcome of unwrapping this. This is what I call a bespoke unwrap. So it will be a little bit harder to apply like a generalized texture to this. If you're using like a generalized texture, like just a flat texture sheet that they use in a lot of games, for speed purposes, it would have a much different UV unwrap. Everything's very stacked on top of each other. But I want you guys to really kind of get to grips with using the unwrapping tools, get to grips with how to move UVs around, how to kind of like think about unwrapping certain shapes and that sort of thing. Because texturing minor assets like these for games and films is quite easy, because you do just lay a lot of UVs on top of each other because they're all taking the same texture, and then they use like the advanced baking algorithms in the engine to start making stuff look really, really cool. But in this case, I'm just going to do this as a bespoke texture, so I can go and texture this quite in depth and make sure everything looks like how I want it to look. Cool. So this is the outcome that I want to get, and what I'm going to do is actually duplicate this off and move it away. So that's my finalized one. So this one, I'm actually going to just scramble the UVs. Excuse me. And I'm going to start from the beginning. So with this, there's a few different ways we can actually start to unwrap this. One way that I try to unwrap everything, if I'm looking at something that's got individual sections, or if I see individual sections, I'll first try and split all those sections off. And one thing I do first is actually project the object in a planar, so that can actually just, especially because it's so simple and just symmetrical, I can just split all those sections off very quickly and move them to different areas and unwrap each one individually, then place them in. This only took me about 10 minutes to do, so let's get started. So in my UV editor, I want to make sure that I'm going to be projecting down the Z-axis, because I want to be looking at it from the front, like that. Making sure that obviously keep image width height ratio is turned on, because if I had it turned off, we'd have this, obviously it'd be squashing to the frame. So I just want to make sure I'm keeping it maintained as possible, and keeping that on. So now what I'm going to do is decide what sections I'm going to split off and what sections I'm going to keep as one group. So what I will do is first on my UV editor, so yours is going to be a little bit different, and in fact what I might do is jump over to 2018 so that I can show you that it's the newer version of Maya, but it's got the UV unwrapping setup that you have. So I'll just jump over to 18. So we've jumped into 2018, but the reason I've done this, like I've said, is because 2018 has the version of the UV unwrapping editor that we have in the school computers, which is the newer setup. it's because minus 17 that we've got is a later pack, so it's much more closer to the 18 setup. So I've got my my complete unwrap here, and I've got my unwrapped one here. So I've just done my projection. I'm going to make sure that I've got this turned on here. This basically just shows me all my different UV normals. So red meaning that the UVs are facing away from me, blue meaning they're facing towards me. And I'm going to go through and start cutting up all these edges. And I'm going to do this, I'm going to start selecting these edges inside the 3D view so that I can get a much more precise cut. So I'm going to first turn off, I don't know why I've got object symmetry turned on, turn that off. I'm going to go through and I'm going to first cut, so it might be better if I turn that off, this upper lid section off. So I've just got the exterior faces. I'm going to select this top ring here and then do a cut or shift X. So let's remember shift X is our cut. So select that, shift X, there we go. I am going to say turn on, now I've got to find out where this is. Texture border edge, texture borders here. So whenever I make a cut, it should get thicker. The line should get thicker, which it's not doing. I'm wondering why. There we go. So now that line is thicker. And I'm going to separate away from the bottom here. So I'm just getting this upper simple flute section here. So it turns out this shift X doesn't actually work, which is fun. So boom, cut that. And then I'm going to cut this section away. So we're getting just this section here is one piece. Now I've got, remember that the last tool you've used is map to G for gamma. So if the cut tool was the last thing I've used, then I could just go through, select the edges I want to cut, press G and it's cut it. And you can tell that it's been cut because the line gets thicker and it gets white. So then I'm going to cut these two sections away and leave this inner sort of crevasse area. I'm going to cut this area away. So I'm looking at like major angle changes, places where the geometry really takes a bit of a different turn, and cut those away. Or places where I'm thinking of a texture, places where I'm going to have a major texture change, or where I can put a very dark line to mask the fact that it's a texture edge, and then that'll allow me to just maintain a little bit of believability to my object. Cut that, and then cut those two sections. Actually, no. But, yeah. So that's all my different sections cut apart. Oh, remember to cut this guy away in the interior. Like that. So now when I can select and move all these sections away from each other, which is what I do. Whenever I'm unwrapping stuff, I tend to separate everything into their own little space so that I can work on it individually, and I'm not having to kind of mess around with having all these different UVs sitting over each other. And there we go. So we've got these two flat sections here. We've got this guy and we've got this guy. These are actually just the planar or the flat sections of our geometry. And they're the first things I'll probably get unwrapped properly, because I can just do a planar projection on both of these at the same time, going in the y-axis, because I can just project those flat, just like we did with our crate top. I can project both of those, and so that's my bottom, and that's the interior of my vessel at the top. So I can leave those alone for the time being. The one thing I am going to do is basically cut down the back, so the reverse side of this this z-axis. I'm going to put a cut going all the way from the top to the bottom. Now this will then translate onto these faces, on these UV islands, and then I can start unfolding these all together. So I'm going to go to the top view, and I'm going to find the negative Z, which is obviously this way, and then I'm going to double click just that line to select that entire line, but then deselect the line which is going into the interior here and the line which is going into the bottom there, because I don't need those to be cut. Those have already been projected. So once that's been selected, you can see each one of these has got a little orange line going down it, which signifies the selection. Make a cut, and you can see there's a white line traveling down the back of each one of these assets. Now this is where I can now start unwrapping all these different things. So if anyone has used the old version of the unwrap editor like I was using before, this is a little bit different. There is two ways of unwrapping inside the old editor. There's the Unfold 3D, which is very good for doing characters and anything that's organic and a little bit amorphous. And then there's the Legacy Unfold, which is very good for doing mechanical or hard surface objects, because you can tell it to only unwrap across either a vertical or a horizontal axis, and it'll maintain a lot of the very strong structure. And this is what I mean, because I have to think about all these different assets are going to fit inside a texture sheet, and on my other one they're all nice and fitting inside this square. So, and this was done in the old version of Maya. So this one, if I just go down and select that I want to unfold this, let's do this, yeah, see this flute section here. If I just go to unfold, we get this shape, which is a usable shape. You see that it gives you a pretty nice unfold here, but it's just a bit of a bad shape to then set up inside the UV window, or inside the UV space. So what I'm going to do is use the unfold along, and I'm going to just see what unfold along V does. It does that. And then unfold across U, it does that. Now this unfold across U is what I'm really looking for, because it gives me a nice straight object, a little bit of wobbly shape, but I can fix that. So if I actually turn on my checkerboard, either black, white or colour, doesn't really matter, you can see there that I'm getting a pretty good unfold there. A little bit wobbly, that's just because I need to straighten some of these lines on the side. So I can do that easily by selecting my edges that I want to straighten, and so let's find the center of this, which is there, I think. Yeah, this is the center of my object. So I'm going to start everything to the left side of that line. I'm going to start aligning to the right. So if I go to align and snap, we should be familiar with these little guys here. So this one here is aligned to the right, this third little dude. So I'm going to click that, and it might not look like it's done anything, but it's just me being very, very careful, very, very particular about stuff. And I'm just going to go through and align. And obviously the last tool I used was this align tool. So I can just go through and press G every time. You can see that the further we go along, the more effect it's having. You can see that it's really having an effect. There you go. This one I'll probably align to the center like that. Do the same for these ones. So going across here, I want to align to the left, because this is where kind of like, this is where the logic part of modeling comes in, or they're just a practice. I know that the way these objects have moved, I'll need to start aligning them a little bit differently than you would expect to align them. So everything to the right of the center of this line needs to be aligned to the left, which I'm going to start doing now. Whoops. Until I get to the center, or to the very edge, and then I will align it to the center of that. So this, I'm going to align to the center, like that. Now this gives us a really nice unwrap, or a pretty nice unwrap. I can go in there, I can do a little bit of tweaking if I need to. Now these are going to have generally quite metallic textures, or maybe like a clay texture, so we're not going to get any super hard information that if it was a little bit off you'd know straight away, like text or something. So just getting these to a point where we can have them inside a unwrap is what we want. So I'm going to do the same thing for this, see how that's actually affected the unwrap. That's done pretty well. and then I'll see what happens. I'll just move this. I'll see what happens when I start doing the alignment stuff on this. So let's start turning that so I can see them. One second, okay. Okay. And then I can see that I could probably end up just messing with the UVs a little bit. Okay, that's good. And basically, I'm going to go through that for every one of these assets just to do the unfold across U, see how it unfolds, see how the actual texture takes it, and then just try and straighten it up as much as possible. Now, what some of these will not need to have is actually have all the edges straightened like this, especially the really kind of bendy elements, because that will really distort the UVs. So I'm going to see what happens with this one, and I might say that this one see how this one works. So just messing with some of these tools to see the outcome. Okay, it's looking okay. Seeing if I can just, that's looking okay. Oh, I've got step snap turned on. So scale, turn that step snap off. Now, the more amorphous our objects get, the less we need to have these straightened. And to be honest, I'm still kind of getting used to this new UV unwrapping layout. So a lot of the tools that I used to really like using, I'm not able to either find or they don't exist anymore. Or they just don't work the way they used to. So it's one thing I would say is just get hold of some UVs and just start either just make something and start playing with the unwrap, seeing what effects you can get. So yeah, I'm just going to go through now and unwrap everything. I'll probably speed up the video for this as well, so it's not as monotonous. But I'll basically just be doing the exact same thing for each one of these models. I'll be unwrapping it, trying to straighten it up, see how the straightening actually affects the UVs, and if it affects too much, I'll try and find a workaround for it. Always looking back and forth from the checkerboard, always moving around my object in the 3D space, just checking if stuff works. So I will carry on with this, and I will speed up the video. So what we've got here is the model completely UV'd. We shouldn't have a problem with areas like down here. Again, this is a model where you're going to have kind of very broad strokes kind of transition on the surface, and you're never going to really pick up on those. If we were doing this like a super high intense, high definition model, we'd UV it completely differently. We'd actually allow it to maintain a lot of these very bendy surfaces, and then we'd also be using something like Substance Painter or Mari to actually paint it. So then we won't have to worry about make sure everything fits, because the natural painting method inside those softwares allows us to get that working. But because we'll be taking this into Photoshop, more than likely it's okay, and we can get the scratches and any sort of like surface detail or anything like that quite nicely from it. The only problem we're going to have from this that we need to be aware of is that obviously it being a cylindrical object, there's no end to any of these surfaces. It will just keep going round and round and round. So it's points where you're going to have this seam line here that you need to take a bit of time and make sure that you don't have a seam line. And there are tricks to doing that, which I can show people, which are relatively easy to do, but you don't generally think about them straight away. But that is my candlestick made. And again, like I said, if I was doing this at speed, this would be done in about half an hour. The longest time taken would probably be on the modelling and spending a bit of time just to make sure that the UVs are as nice as I can get them. And also, biggest thing, utilising this UV space. I mean, the last thing I've actually got to do is just grab all these UVs, move them over the top of the actual UV 0 to 1 space. So this, where you got this green and red line here, I want it to fit inside this square. I just use the square at the minute like this. It's easy to fit it in. I can use the dark lines here as or the blue lines to properly get an idea about fitting into a square. So I can just scale it down a tiny bit and then normalize it into this area here. So inside my align and snap, I'll move it so it's sitting predominantly over the top of this UV space here. Click normalize and it'll fit in like that. And the only thing after that I might do is just scale it in a tiny bit more. A tiny bit more, just so my UVs aren't super crushed up against the side. For an object like this, because I'm not having a repeated texture that goes from one side of the texture to the other, I just want to give it a little bit of space, just so I don't accidentally start grabbing textures from other places. So if I have maybe a wooden base and brass body, then if this is the brass section here and this is the wooden section here, I don't want wooden sections to be bleeding over into my brass section as the textures are being calculated and compressed inside the rendering engine or inside the scene. So I'm just going to give it a tiny bit of space around the edges just to give it a bit of breathing room. But I'm utilising this space as much as possible. There's some tiny bits here that are not being used, but that's just down to the fact that we're dealing with some kind of awkward shapes to put inside a square, so circles into squares. But if I was doing something like putting gemstones or putting bits of smaller detail stuff as physical geometry, I'll absolutely utilise this space to try and get that as dense as possible. But no, so that's our candlestick made. That's ready to go. The UVs are set up. The only thing I'd have to do is make sure that the translate is on the bottom of the grid, and this is perfectly in the bottom of the grid, which is easy because in modify, and even though we're in 18, this happens in 17 as well. You go to modify, freeze transformation. That will then zero out all this information here. So if I've actually got some rotation information applied to it, so there I've got 45 degrees in my rotate Y. If I just go to modify, freeze transformation, all that gets zeroed out, or in this case the scale gets returned to 1. And I've still got all this stuff here, my history, so I'm going to delete that history, edit, delete by type history, that's all cleaned, and I'd name my object, because this is pasted underscore p cylinder 1, because it's this, and this is pasted p cylinder 1 because I pasted it from the other scene. I would just go and call that candlestick 01. and then I can export that and take that into Photoshop. I'll take the UVs into Photoshop, or I can export that and take it into Substance Painter, or put it inside a scene to, you know, I could put this inside a game engine scene straight away to just see if it would work. It's easy. So that's my object. I'm going to try and do a few of these, and in later videos I'll probably be explaining a lot less, but in this one I just want to go through quite slowly because it's going up to about, I think it's about an hour and a half this video now. So you know, other videos might be an hour long because I'm not going to be explaining the extrusion method or anything like that, but I might make more complex objects, so like an ornate table or a very kind of elegant glass, or, you know, just something else. But it's all going to be related to the same sort of theme, at least for this first section. So it's all going to be related around medieval, Tudor, you know, old-fashioned items. Okay, cool. So and if you do have an idea for any objects you'd like me to model, you know, send me an email through the student email about what that would be, or even grab me in class and say, hey Dave, you know, model a mace or something. Or even if you've got some things you want me to show you how to do, like little, how do I make chain links, or how do I make drapery or anything like that, tell me and I'll ask it and I'll make a short video about it. Cool. Right, I'll see you soon.